everybody to come on in and take their seats. Welcome, my name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the Executive Director of Charis Circle. Charis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Charis Books, and Charis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We're very honored to be here in the space of the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. Thank you to all of the workers of the library, all of the volunteers, all of the people who make this space beautiful and accessible, especially CEO who's walking out the door right now. It is always an honor to be in this space, which holds great history of our city, and is a perfect place to have this conversation tonight. We are here for the paperback release of There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America. We're joined by the author, Brian Goldstone, in conversation with Josie Duffy Rice. This evening's event is co-sponsored by the Community Movement Builders, also known as CMB. CMB is a Black member-based collective of community residents and activists serving Black, working class, and poor Black communities. CMB emerged out of a need to respond to encroaching gentrification, displacement, and over-policing. CMB organizes to bring power to Black communities by challenging existing institutions and creating new ones that our people control. You can learn more about Community Movement Builders at communitymovementbuilders.org. We're also joined tonight by folks that you probably met in the lobby who are gonna come up and tell us more in just a bit about a terrible bill that's moving through Georgia. It's hard to narrow down which terrible bills are moving through Georgia's State House at the moment, but this one you're gonna learn more about first from Brian, and then we'll have Elizabeth Apley, who's an attorney, come up. And folks from House ATL are here giving flyers out, and it is really important that we speak out as neighbors and community members against this bill, so I encourage you to take a flyer and learn more. Josie Duffy Rice is our interlocutor tonight. Josie is a journalist, writer, law school graduate, and podcast host whose work is primarily focused on prosecutors, prisons, and other criminal justice issues. She is the host of the podcast Unreformed, the story of the Alabama Industrial School for Negro Children, which was released in January 2023. And if somehow it has passed you by, it is a great listen. Go back and check it out. She co-wrote that podcast. In addition, she co-hosts What a Day, Crooked Media's daily news podcast, 2 days a week. She is the creator and co-host of the podcast Justice in America. And until May 2021, she was president of The Appeal, a news publication that publishes original journalism about the criminal justice system. So we're very glad to have Josie with us tonight because she's one of our favorite interviewers and interlocutors. Also just somebody who loves Atlanta. And the author and the person of the hour is Brian Goldstone. He is a journalist and author of There Is No Place for Us, Working and Homeless in America, which was a finalist for the Carnegie Mellon Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction and named one of the 10 best books of 2025 by the New York Times and The Atlantic. His long-form reporting and essays have appeared in the New York Times, Harper's Magazine, The New Republic, and the California Sunday Magazine, among other publications. He received his PhD in cultural anthropology from Duke University and was a Mellon Research Fellow in the Society of Fellows at Columbia University. In 2021, he was a National Fellow at New America. He lives in Atlanta with his family, and we're so glad to have him. So we'll have about 45 minutes of conversation between these two brilliant folks, and then about 15 minutes of questions. So please put your hands together to welcome Josie Duffy Rice and Brian Goldstone.
Hi, it's amazing to see everybody. This is so full. This is the most people I've ever seen in this room, so I'm overwhelmed. And I'm so happy to be here with Brian. I've told Brian this many times, texted you borderline manic many times about how much I love this book and how it was my favorite book last year and how amazing it is. And I will say, I told you this book was going to win a lot of awards. Did I not tell you that?
I didn't believe it.
You didn't believe me, and I was right. This is a lesson. Always listen to me. I have some questions for Brian, and then we'll have some Q&A, and in the middle, we're also going to learn a little bit about a terrible bill moving through Georgia. But first, I just want to say congratulations, paperback. Very exciting.
And I just want to say hello, everyone, and what a total gift it is to be in conversation with you. As I was just telling you a moment ago, like I wanted to ask you to be in conversation with me a long time ago. I was too scared to ask and intimidated by your brilliance and everything. And so this truly like feels special. And there's so many people here tonight who, like literally without whom this book couldn't have happened. I'm sure I'll call you out individually as the night goes on. But this is amazing. And I never cry, I never get choked up, but when we did the Decatur launch event a year ago for the hardcover, I think I cried, and it wouldn't surprise, because I'm already feeling emotional. So bear with me.
Oh, please.
So buckle up.
We're in for a real night, guys. So I wanted to ask you about, when we first talked about this book, I think it was 2021 maybe, and you were really in the middle of working on it. And you had written this piece in 2019, was that New Republic piece?
Yeah.
Okay, so you wrote this piece about working homeless in 2019 for the New Republic. That was amazing. If you haven't read that, you should. It kind of demonstrates that like this idea of being working homeless is not an anomaly, it's a pattern, especially here in Atlanta. And I'm wondering when you sort of realized that it was not an anomaly, that you were not dealing with like something that happens every so often, but you were dealing with kind of a structural problem. And kind of what moment that was and what that led to in terms of the book.
Yeah, so I'm so happy to say that Cokeithia Goodman, who I wrote that article about, is here tonight. Cokeithia, where are you? And so it really all started with Cokeithia. And I think, when I was first learning about your story, Cokeithia, and you were telling me about what you had been through, the fact that you were, working full-time as a home health aide, and I think by the time I met you, you and your kids had been unhoused for several months already, and at that point I was still thinking like, okay, is this, the initial spark actually before I met Cokeithia was my wife Elaine, who is also here, who's a nurse practitioner and was working at Mercy Care, and she was noticing this trend among her patients, like that they were packing boxes in Amazon warehouses or driving for Uber and Lyft, and when they finished their shifts, they weren't going to an apartment. They were like, in some cases, going to tent encampments, or they were going to extended stay hotels, or they were sleeping in their cars. And when she told me about that was like the initial, wait, what is going on here? Because I, even as a relatively progressive, educated person, like harbored this assumption that homelessness and a job were mutually exclusive, and that a job, full-time work was an exit from this most severe form of deprivation, not an accompaniment to it, or even, as I would come to argue, an instigator, that having a certain kind of job actually makes you more likely to experience homelessness. I didn't realize any of that at the time, and so when Cokeithia, allowed me into her world and to begin following her journey, I still wasn't sure. Is this her? Is this an Atlanta thing? Is there just something in the water here? Like, what is going on? But suffice it to say, like, by the end of reporting that story, and realizing that, as I went with Cokeithia to food pantries and to, different places, like, that some journalists really struggle to find like the person who exemplifies the stress. With this story or in this phenomenon, there is no shortage of people who are working and working and working some more, and it still isn't enough to, take care of this most basic human necessity, a roof overhead. And so, I very quickly began to see that it was deeply structural, that Atlanta was more representative of what was happening in cities across the country than some kind of bizarre outlier, that this toxic mix of gentrification-fueled displacement, poverty wages that aren't even close to keeping up with the cost of living, to say nothing of the cost of housing, a lack of basic tenant rights and protections, and of course just soaring rents, like skyrocketing rents, what one could argue is a form of price gouging amid an undeclared state of emergency. That is what is happening with these rising rents. That this toxic mixture, far from being unique to Atlanta, was actually just like, you could switch out Atlanta with any number of cities.
Right.
And so those dynamics, that kind of toxic brew, I began to see that it was happening across the country. And I actually went on to report for other publications in other parts of the country, like California, and saw safe parking lots full of working families living in their minivans, and schools that had opened up their parking lots to families, students who were homeless. That's how vast this population had become. And yeah.
Well, you said that you could switch out Atlanta for many other cities, but for those who haven't read it, this book focuses on Atlanta, and I think it's kind of a surreal experience to read it living here, because there are all these things that many people love and about Atlanta, like the Beltline and all these kind of elements of the city that you suddenly realize are driving part of the problem. And there's something you say about essentially that this is it's not just a poverty problem, it's a prosperity problem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that seeing a city like Atlanta go through this period of growth correlates with this increasing population of working homelessness. So I guess I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about this idea that it's actually a prosperity problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of people intuitively believe that homelessness and poverty kind of go hand in hand, and that how we as a society have treated homelessness. We've segregated it, not only psychologically, like that it's a particular kind of affliction that happens to a particular kind of person, almost like in a Greek tragedy. They're just struck with this malady. There's no systemic causes. There's no policy choices that led to that suffering. Not only do we segregate it psychologically, we also have tended to segregate it in at least visible, conspicuous homelessness in particular parts of the city. And those parts of the city, like quote unquote skid rows, tend to be associated with like really extreme poverty. Or we think of homelessness as springing up in like the sort of hollowed out urban core. I'm probably going to use this word a lot tonight, but what was stunning to me as I dove into this reporting was that this really is not a crisis of poverty, but as you said, it's a crisis of prosperity, a very particular kind of prosperity. The mayor of LA, Eric Garcetti, once said, and he said this self-consciously, he said this almost like, he wasn't necessarily critical of this statement, but this observation, but he said, in a good economy, homelessness goes up. And that is really the reality that I began to see, that all of this insecurity was not being fueled by a failing economy, it was being fueled by a thriving economy. Unemployment was and is, in many ways, at a historic low, remains low. Corporate profits are surging, the signs of growth in Atlanta, as again in many cities, is everywhere. What used to be called the inner city of Atlanta is now, as we all know, a playground for those wealthy enough with enough money to enjoy all of these new amenities and green space and everything. And yet, not despite all of that, but I would argue precisely because of it, the very people whose labor, whose work, not people on the fringes of society, but people whose labor, whose work is making the city possible, and in many ways making that growth possible, making this development, revitalization possible, are being pushed out not only out of the neighborhoods they grew up in, but out of housing altogether. When I met Kokethia, she had formerly been living in the Peoplestown neighborhood near she had the misfortune of living near the Beacon. The Beacon then opened up near the Beltline, and her landlord, very nice woman, I'm not demonizing her, but her landlord had bought this home as an investment after the foreclosure crisis. And for Kokethia, this was a home. For the landlord, this was an asset class. It was an investment vehicle. And she terminated Kokethia's lease. And again, that was the first domino that fell, and Kokethia ended up moving out to Forest Park to a home that was then condemned shortly after, when her son DJ, who's also here, went to plug in an outlet and got a really bad shock, and then the fire, and then the house was condemned. And so it's so important to see. I mean, I'm the worst person to have at like parties in Atlanta now, or like a friend was even saying, hey, tonight let's go to this brewery down the street. And whenever I'm at a brewery, I'm like, oh, this used to be low-income housing, or so I'm like, it's ruined Atlanta for me in many ways, because so much of what is wonderful about the city, so much of what is cool and sexy and whatever, the people I wrote about in this book, and the many, 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 many people like them who are languishing in these zones of abandonment, like Candler Road, where people are just sort of dumped after being displaced, and the property values are not skyrocketing in those areas. They've been they're the product of what Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls organized abandonment. These people, these many, many people, they are the casualties of Atlanta's success. And there's a Toni Morrison line that I think could have been the epigraph for this book. It's one that I thought about a lot, but when she was speaking to Sarah Lawrence College at their commencement, she said, imagine, envision, if your fun, your enjoyment was not predicated on the deprivation of another. And I just feel like that's true in so many ways for our society. I mean, there's so many ways that can be applied. It's very much a kind of colonial logic. It's an imperialist logic, but it's also a logic that I think many of us who enjoy all that a city like Atlanta has to offer are sadly oblivious to.
Yeah, I guess I want to ask you about, I'm trying to stop saying I guess so much. That's my New Year's resolution. I've failed miserably.
It's okay to be
I wanted to ask about that, because there is this sense when reading the book of that this is a universal loss. So you talk about these 5 families in particular, you talk about the working homeless, you talk about people who are suffering, like in this incredibly tangible way, while waking up every day, like you said, going to work where they're helping people, being home healthy. It's like we're doing these important jobs and not able to, put a roof over their heads. And while I'm reading it, I'm like, as a resident of Atlanta, I lose something too when we deprive so many residents of stability, when we incentivize instability. So I'm wondering if I don't know how clear that question is, but I guess I'm wondering, what did you take away from what this has done to all of us in some ways, as residents of this city, to exist in the midst of such precarity, and unnecessary precarity. This is not necessary.
Totally, yeah. I mean, and I just want to say, there's a lot of seats up here if anyone wants to.
Come sit, come hang out.
Josie and I are very nice. I think it's important, because I have to remind myself of this, even at events like this, that who we are is not necessarily clear, or that one thing that the term working homeless does is it throws into immediate doubt, the stability of our assumptions about us and them. Because what Working Homeless says is that the boundary, the line separating housed from unhoused is like devastatingly porous. And so there could be a lot of people here right now, as I'm about to answer a question about like, what does this do to us as residents of Atlanta? There could be many people here who are just 1 or 2 missed paychecks, or 1 or 2 medical emergencies, or yet another rent hike, or another week or 2 weeks of lapsed childcare because to joining the ranks of the newly unhoused in the city. And so I think that in itself, I think that's part of what is so scandalous about that concept. It's not just, or that category, it's not just the ways that it explodes violently are myths, which is itself a violent myth about the American dream and about sort of the bootstrap, ideology and all of that, that if you just work hard enough, if you just clock enough hours, you might not be able to buy a mansion, but you'll at least be able to have a modicum of stability. Like, not only does it explode that, but it explodes like just the sense of distance that for, I think, a lot of people is really crucial to maintain. It's like, I have to believe that, as I was saying earlier, that homelessness is like a condition over there somewhere. And, and for some of the families in the book, understandably, Celeste is also here. Because Celeste, I was thinking of you as I was about to answer this. Like, I remember early on, you were having a really hard time allowing the word homeless to be on your own situation. It was like, there's no way that this could be me and my kids, and all of the stigma around that. But also, if I remember right, there's almost a theological thing. Like, if I put that label on myself, I will become that thing, a kind of like name it and claim it, an inversion of that. So, so I think that there's an understandable reluctance to make homelessness something that could never happen to me, or that I could never be. But yeah, that's one way of answering the question of how do we as a city. I mean, there are entire swaths, not just of the poor and working class, but of the middle class now, the downwardly mobile middle class, who are at immediate risk of joining this pop. So I mean, it's kind of a cliche at this point, but so many of us are way, way closer to being in that position that Celeste was in, of wait, do I call these numbers on this resource list that the school social worker at my kid's school gave me, than we are to buying a third home that we're hoping to turn into an Airbnb.
Right. This is my grandma, so I'm going to let her sit down. Well, you can sit too. Okay. I guess not. I want to talk about isolation, because I feel like that's a real theme in this book, which is how isolating this experience is. Not just the shame, but how it incentivizes isolation as a policy. So I'm thinking about the story where someone is evicted because they let someone with a criminal record into their home, or there is a general you end up having to not help people who, okay, that's my daughter too. Where all of us just hanging out.
My great uncle's gonna come up.
Yeah. It's actually our family reunion. You end up having to, you need help from your neighbors, and you end up not being able to help your neighbors when they need help, because you're incentivized to isolate, essentially. And I think for so many people, it's like, okay, if I lost everything, maybe I could go live with my parents, maybe I could go live with my friends, or maybe I would, but the system, as you explained very beautifully, I think, the structural incentive is not towards being able to help your neighbors. Yeah. It's basically pushing you away from that. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Britt in the book, her story is so harrowing in many ways, because Britt, if I could just tell it
Yes,
super
please.
quickly. And I'm always like at pains in these conversations to not allow the conversation to like be up here in this abstract realm, but to like really ground it. Because in some ways, like the modest endeavor of this book is simply to like give a platform to the people, to these families' journeys, you know, over many years, and just to show like how, as with Celeste, as with Cookie, you know, how like preternaturally strong they are, and yeah, and so Britt, her roots in Atlanta go back 5 generations. She was actually born at East Lake Meadows before it was demolished to make way for this mixed income development. And Britt realizes like the only way she's going to survive, to be able to have housing in the city of her birth, because when the book opened, she's doubled up with her great-grandmother with her 2 kids. They're sleeping on the sofa, and she works at the Atlanta airport. She realizes the only way they're going to be able to have any kind of stability is by getting a housing voucher, like winning the voucher lottery. And the fact that we even use the term lottery in relation to this most essential thing, housing, and that we do it uncritically, we just like use phrases like housing voucher, like it just flies up our mouth, and I mean, it should shame us all. Like that's a bizarre thing. But finally, she actually wins the voucher lottery, and then 2 years later, she gets off the waiting list, and she finds a landlord who's willing to rent to her, which itself seems miraculous.
Right.
And then her cousin, Steve, gets out of prison. They were best friends growing up, and you know, people who are coming out of prison, who are formerly incarcerated, are like disproportionately more at risk of experiencing homelessness than the general population. And Steve can't find anyone to give him a job, can't find anyone to rent him an apartment. So Britt's like, of course you can stay with me. There was nothing in the lease barring that, but one of her neighbors told the property, you know, the management company, oh, this dude got out of prison, and when Britt went to renew her lease, they said, sorry, we're not gonna renew your lease. And then after another few months of trying to find another landlord to rent to her, she ended up losing the voucher before it could be, you know, and she lost it. And that year, incidentally, just as an aside, there were something like 1,800 vouchers issued to families in Atlanta who had gotten off the waiting list, and close to 1,200 expired before they could be used. Because, again, now a tangent, in a city like Atlanta, in a hot rental market where landlords have little financial incentive to take a voucher because they can't jack up rents at will, they have to keep it at a certain level, and they have to pass inspections. There's very little incentive, right? So like, that's what replaced public housing, that's what the Reagan administration called the genius of the private market that would take care of everyone's housing needs. It's a market that says, sure, we'll take your voucher when it's in my financial best self. And I don't want to downplay also like the bureaucratic hurdles that you have to jump through and the red tape, there's that as well. But anyway, she ends up losing the voucher. And yeah, that was a super, super long way of answering the question about like incentivizing not helping your family members. Like if Britt had turned him away, he would have been homeless. She may have been able to keep that apartment. Incidentally, you know, Britt then is, when she becomes homeless, after she can't find someone to take her voucher, and you know, she becomes homeless with her kids, she's begging her sister and her sister's boyfriend, who now have a kid, like, can we stay with you? And they're terrified that if they say yes, they're gonna get evicted from their apartment. And so, so there's this very complicated dance of like, I helped you, now it's your turn to help me, but we're all gonna be screwed if we help each other. And yeah, I mean, and we know even with public housing, like that incentivized all sorts of things, like people not getting married or not having your boyfriend or girlfriend who was incarcerated, like come live with you, which breaks up families. And so yeah, we have a way of really punishing people for helping each other. And there's a term that sociologists use that was really striking to me when I came across it. It's called network poverty. And what it suggests is that everyone in your network is like equally deprived. So there's no one to call. Like, we're all in a similar predicament. Your network is impoverished. Or it can also just suggest a poverty of relations, like a lack of relations. But that is a huge indicator of whether you will or will not be pushed into homelessness when that rent hike happens, or that eviction or whatever. And one last thing about that, the word doubled up or couch surfing, a big argument in the book is that there's this entire world of homelessness that is out of sight, that isn't just hidden or invisible, but that has been actively rendered invisible. It's a kind of manufactured invisibility. And what I mean by that is that none of the families in the book are counted in the annual homeless census because they're not in a shelter or on the street. Families who are doubled up with others, families who are living in extended stay hotels, and hopefully we'll talk about the extended stays, or living in their cars, they're not counted. And part of the reason they're not defined as literally homeless by HUD is because there's been this assumption that if you're like doubled up with others, you're just couch surfing. I hate that phrase. It's like this euphemism that is supposed to suggest that you're just like,
chilling,
we're watching HBO and we're just couch surfing. And couch surfing, being doubled up, public health researchers have shown that you are equally at risk, if not more at risk, of sexual violence, sexual assault. Britt, actually, in the book, was assaulted by a relative when she was younger, when her mom was displaced and became homeless, when they were staying with relatives. So, there's this idea that if you're in these situations, you're somehow less vulnerable than those in shelters or on the street. But people in those conditions, families, children, are just as exposed to toxic stress. They're just as exposed to all kinds of predation and harm. And so I think it's just important to say that, because that is part of why people want to avoid even being in the position of asking this relative, or this coworker, can we stay in your basement? Can we stay in your living room? Because it can actually be really dangerous too.
Right. You were talking about extended stay hotels, and one of the many takeaways from this book is just how expensive it is to be unhoused. It's just enormously expensive, right? And one way that it's a story that sticks with me is the woman who actually gets access to help with her rent, but they have to do an assessment, the environmental assessment, and it's taking a month, and it's taking another month, and that month is costing her so much money at the extended stay hotel that she says, actually just give it to me without the help, and I'll try to figure out how to make my rent. But it's essentially the assistance itself is costing her a lot of money. And you come away from this, the depths of hatred I have for these extended stay hotel companies and these kind of these predatory private enterprises that are making all this money off of what it means to be unhoused. But I was wondering if you could talk about the extended stay hotels. It's a good time to talk about the bill.
So often in talking about the housing crisis or the homelessness crisis, there's this idea that if we just build more units, it's just get rid of the zoning restrictions, get rid of the red tape, and just build more units, and that will take care. That's I didn't want to say it. We shall not utter that. And yes, there's some truth to that. The exclusionary zoning, especially in a city like Atlanta, is not only awful, but it's also racist. There's an entire racist history of that. I don't want to underplay, that is super important to point out. But what is often left out of our conversations about housing, especially, is just exploitation, is just naked exploitation, naked predation. And there's that famous Baldwin quote, which you just alluded to, about how in America it's extremely expensive to be poor or to be homeless. And I think that's absolutely true. You see that again and again in this book, just with all of, the interest rates that people are forced to pay, or just once you join America's credit underclass, how much more expensive everything becomes. Yes, that's true, but it's also, I think what the book shows is the flip side of that, how extremely lucrative and profitable all of this precarity has become. Just like how profitable, how much money is being made, how many business models are designed not just to capitalize on this suffering, to capitalize on this insecurity, but to actively exacerbate it, to ensure that there is no end in sight. And it runs the gamut. It runs the gamut from like new co-signing companies that are saying, oh, you have awful credit, we'll co-sign for you. You don't have parents, again, you are experiencing network poverty, you don't have parents who can co-sign, we'll co-sign for you. And it's also extremely expensive, and that happens to Maurice and Natalia in the book, and that them having this co-signer does nothing to prevent them from subsequently losing their housing and becoming homeless. Everything from that to like payday lenders and application fees. Don't get me started on application fees. I mean, there was a community forum, some of you may have been there, in DeKalb, last year, and about like extended stay hotels and homelessness, and someone mentioned application fees and the whole room just erupted. It says something about the class status of this room, that the room didn't erupt when I just said application. Just kidding. But everything, I mean, just awful. But yeah, the biggest manifestation of this exploitation are the extended stay hotels. Like, I would drive by these hotels all the time. I just drove by, Elaine and I, on the way here, we drove down Candler Road, and there's hotels everywhere. And as a resident of Atlanta, I just assumed, oh yeah, these are hotels. These are places where, yeah, maybe like traveling nurses stay, or business, extended stay hotel. Again, like couch surfing, just this like, it glosses over so much. What I now see them as are extremely profitable homeless shelters that spring up, that proliferate in the absence often, not only of affordable housing and tenant protections, but in the absence of like actual family homeless shelters. And so, yeah, these hotels are really bad places. Like, I kind of embedded myself, so to speak, for, I believe, over a year at Efficiency Lodge on Candler Road. That's where I met Celeste, as well as other families in the book. And, you know, what I saw there was just, it's very hard to describe, like how, I mean, the conditions that people were forced to live in. I'm talking like leaky ceilings, black mold. At one point in the book, Celeste is hired by the hotel manager to paint over, there's going to be an inspection from the health department, and to paint over all of the black mold in an elderly woman's room. And Celeste used to wonder, why is she always going to the ER, this older woman, for asthma issues? You know, like, why is her, and oh, it's because she is in a room that is like saturated with black mold, and Celeste is being asked to just paint over it because of this inspection. And yet these rooms are often, I mean, they can be double what you would pay for an apartment down the road. Right. Maurice and Natalia, they end up at Extended Stay America, and for their studio-sized room, in a span of 8 months, they spent $17,000 for the studio-sized room with their 3 kids. The apartment they had just been evicted from down the street, the Whitney in Sandy Springs, was half as much as this shitty, awful hotel room. And, sorry, I forgot your kids are here. And yeah, I think like, and Extended Stay America, where they were at precisely the moment that they were paying $17,000 in this 8-month span during the pandemic. Blackstone and Starwood Capital, these 2 private equity giants, they bought Extended Stay America for $6 billion because they realized that amid a housing crisis, amid an affordable housing crisis, there's a lot of money to be made off of people's desperation. And as one industry publication put it, when in doubt, go extended stay. So this like disreputable, what was once a disreputable backwater of the hotel industry is now this, again, as this industry publication put it, a gold mine for investors. So like we really have to reckon with that fact, with the fact that Wall Street isn't just like buying up single-family homes and multifamily rental housing, but they're also buying up the very places where people are forced to go once they lose their housing. And I just feel like so much of that has been left out of the discussion.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you 2 more questions, and then we can take a few questions. I think questions will be at the mic. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, correct. But, so, again, I think when I first talked to you about this book was in 2021, and you were really in it. You were like reporting, and I remember reporting this book must have been harrowing. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly thorough. You're following people for a really long time, and you're seeing them in some of the most difficult points of their life, and they're in need, right? And I think this is something that if you report on people struggling, which is kind of the job, right? You encounter people need something and you can't necessarily provide it, or there are these ethical considerations, or you're trying to be objective, and there's all this complicated dynamics. And so I'm wondering what it was like for you, because this is, it's such a devastating read. It's so beautifully done, and it's so important, but it's devastating. And like you said, you were really embedded in this for years. Last time I talked to you, you were like, I don't know, man, this is brutal, And so seeing it on the other side is like amazing, and also I feel like I got a slight hint of what you had to kind of go through, which obviously is not what the people you're reporting on are going through, but is its own experience too.
Throughout this whole process, it was hard for me to even acknowledge how hard it was, because of how exponentially harder it was for those, for those who I was writing about, following, spending time with. And so I really minimized the effect it was had, as it should be. I also, I don't know, I still struggle to like say anything coherent to a question like this, or just in talking about, because there's so much I'm still trying to come to terms with. It's very humbling to like be looking at Cokeithia right now, and I'm just, as you were asking, it's almost like a movie play, like all the times is like, and all the pain, like all of the pain, like, and the feeling of helplessness, like I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I did try to have boundaries, like during the reporting that we kind of talked about up front. It was sort of like, okay, if we're gonna show people the reality of what it's like to be you, and like to deal at every turn with these systems that are just militating actively against your security, against your stability, like we have to show the real, like I can't be like the wizard behind the curtain pulling strings, and that's fine. And the families who I ended up following, like they got that. I think there was a sense of like almost collaboration, like how can we together show this reality? And yet it got very messy. Like there were times where, and it should be, like frankly, like I don't trust any journalist or researcher who isn't tortured by these tensions, by these questions. Like we should, like I've almost like seeing my inability to have a coherent answer to this almost as like something to claim and like hold on to, because I think we need to learn how to like stumble over our words when talking about things like this. I don't think that as journalists or researchers or scholars or even caseworkers or agency heads or whatever it is, that we should just have this like cool, smooth way of answering this question, and we throw up words like boundaries as if they're obvious and self-evident, and about the need to like protect ourselves or the integrity of our work, but boundaries can very quickly become a fortress, and that we retreat to, and I really tried actively to like work against that, to like Pink, who's in the book, L.A. Pink, there's a term I use to describe her, radical availability, and I really tried to have that myself. I tried to emulate that radical availability and be the guy who Celeste can call at 1 in the morning, or take Naya, her daughter, to the ER when she's pregnant because Celeste can't go because she's sick. And like I really tried to cultivate that, and it got messy. It got really messy. It got messy. But it should be that way, and yeah, and I just, since I'm on the subject, and because this is maybe just my tendency to like try to not have the attention be on like, how did this make you feel, Brian? I just want to say, like, because I haven't been able to say this over the last year, because they haven't been in the like, I just want to honor you guys. Like, oh my God. I mean, there are just people all around us all the time who were just, maybe we even like are pissed off because they seem pissed off at the airport, or like, why aren't they more friendly in the drive-thru? And we have no idea what people are carrying. We have no idea whether they just slept in the very parking lot of the grocery store that you're now shopping in and where they're now checking you out. Like, I just want to, like, you are so strong, and I'm so grateful that you allowed. So that was, I just want to say that because I may not have another chance to publicly.
That's actually a great segue, but I do want to just ask really quickly, because we also want to feature someone talking about the legislation. Like, can you talk a little bit about what's happening right now, kind of countrywide, but also here in Georgia?
It's funny because when I finished the book, I actually had this thought, like, is it still going to be relevant when it comes out?
No, we solve capitalism, so yeah.
I mean, and of course, relevance can also just be about like a public mood, a public feeling, and I think there was a possibility that depending on who won the election, there could be a public feeling, if not a reality, that this stuff was being addressed meaningfully at the federal level. And what we've seen over the last year with this administration is just gasoline being dumped on an already raging disaster. Like, really showing us how, even though economists may slice up life into housing and healthcare and food and utility costs, and like, that's not how we live our lives. And so it's not just that this administration has been bent on like turning the housing safety net into a sieve and and decimating it further than it already was, but like just across the safety net, with SNAP, with healthcare costs soaring, and you pull one thread and the whole thing unravels. And so I think we're seeing that people who work in the trenches are seeing this, just how much harder it is. And that's devastating. It's utterly horrific to witness, and it's all connected. I mean, I just think it's so important that we see what ICE is doing, the fact that we are now, as a country, about to spend, I forget what something like 4 times more on new cages for people to be rounded up than we are on homes for people, on new housing. A Washington Post story last week broke the story that the Pentagon is, quote, struggling to figure out how to spend the extra $50 billion that this administration wants to give it in the new budget. when this country already spends more on the military than the next 14 countries combined on the list. So like, it's all, like we can't, like we have to, I believe, have this very expansive analysis that is capable of bringing it all together. And that's also true at the local level. Like we can't talk about housing over here and not talk about Cop City or talk about, all the stuff we've been talking about, just the glorious revitalization, the World Cup, all of these things are connected to each other. The fact that Eviction Lab at Princeton just released a report last week or the week before showing that Atlanta has the highest number of evictions in the country. More evictions than New York City and Metro Atlanta, despite the fact that Metro Atlanta has a quarter of the renters that New York City has. And that should horrify it. Like whatever we're doing, and I don't want to minimize, because there are people in this room who are working very diligently and passionately on it, but we can't just celebrate some new tiny homes over here, or some new units at 60% AMI over there if we're not turning off the spigot that is producing this relentless churn into homelessness and precarity. And so that's what's happening. I mean, there's a lot to be hopeful for at the local level. Like, Washington does not have the final word on our housing future. Tenant unions are springing up across the country. Tenants are organizing. Tenants aren't waiting for policymakers to take their desperation. They're saying, you will take us seriously. Like, we will demand this. We will go on rent strike. We will chain ourselves, as they did in Kansas City during the pandemic. We will chain ourselves to courtroom doors to prevent people from being put out during a public health emergency. Like, that's what tenants are doing. There's a lot to be hopeful about. But there's also a real need, I think, to be clear-eyed and to, again, have the ability to not segregate housing and homelessness from let's just say to segregate it from our idea of what a good economy is, right? You probably don't need to be told that, we need to stop looking at GDP and how the Dow Jones and let's see how long the line outside the food pantry in the Pittsburgh neighborhood at beloved community churches on a Saturday morning. Let's see how long that line is. Let's see if it's getting longer. Let's see how many people are being turned away when they go to Gateway Center to try to get some kind of assistance for housing because they're homeless. Let's use those metrics to determine how our city is doing and how our economy is doing.
I'm going to ask Elizabeth Apley to come up. Elizabeth, if you are. All right, so Elizabeth's going to tell us about this bill and what we can do about it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. This is amazing.
This is Elizabeth Apley, and she's going to speak about this horrendous bill before the state legislature that is directly primed to harm extended stay residents.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, my name is Elizabeth Apley. I'm an attorney and public policy advocate. I represent a number of groups, a number of nonprofits at the Capitol on housing, homelessness, healthcare, mental health care, and economic justice, all interrelated. And we're working on dozens of pieces of legislation, both proactive and defensively. But this issue, House Bill 61, as it's been amended in the Senate Public Safety Committee and now is laying in the Senate Rules Committee, available to be brought up for a Senate floor vote at any time, probably starting on Monday. This legislation proposes to undo the excellent work that Lindsay Siegel, who is here with us tonight, one of the lead attorneys with the Atlanta Legal Aid Society, brought suit. In 2023, the Georgia Supreme Court ruled in their favor, recognizing that people who have lived months and years in extended stay hotels are to be treated as tenants and if removal is appropriate, to be removed through the process of eviction, just as every other entity providing residential housing must abide, they too must abide. This legislation proposes to undo those protections and to treat people who have been living for months and years in extended stay hotels as transient guests subject to immediate lockout. Not only locking them out, but requiring law enforcement to come and perform the removal, not even taking their own responsibility for performing part of their functions as a corporation. And then requiring law enforcement to treat these people as criminal trespassers because they were a minute or an hour or a day late in paying the fees. These fees are exorbitant, and Brian highlighted how disproportionately large they are compared to the cost of rent. In the DeKalb County study that was published by Georgia State University last month, they found that people were paying 40% more to pay by the day rather than to pay by the week. 40% more because they couldn't put together the pennies and the dollars from their employment in order to pay on a weekly basis. So this is very egregious legislation. It's House Bill 61. It passed the House as a bill dealing with license plate fees for ambulances. And when you look it up, that's what you'll see. But you click on current version and you'll see, well, how did it end up in the Senate in this way? Well, the bill was brought to the House Judiciary Committee pretty early last year in 2025. Before the Hotel Association finished testifying, the bill was unanimously tabled in the House Judiciary Committee, never to be heard from again. But Senate Public Safety stripped out that ambulance license fee bill at the instance of the author, Representative Devin Seabaugh, who's one of the people we asked you to contact, and put this bill on along with a squatter bill, bad bill. This legislation needs to be stopped. We're asking for you to raise your voices, contact your senator, your state senator. You can find who they are at the legislative website. Please also contact the Lieutenant Governor, the Rules Chair, the author of the bill, Devin Seabaugh, and Sean Still, who is carrying the bill in the Senate, as well as the pro tem. Explain to them why you feel this is bad. Certainly, when you're contacting your senator, let them know you're a constituent. You know, in Georgia, we purport to have enormous concern about these families, about children in foster care. Housing inadequacy is the third largest reason why children are removed from their home and placed into foster care in Georgia every year. My contact information is on the back. If you're interested in this legislation, if you're interested in the other ways in which we're trying to prevent homelessness, such as House Bill 689, which would provide a state-funded emergency rental assistance program, and the $25 billion we're seeking in the budget to fund it for this year, get involved, join House ATL. Support the Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers Foundation. Michael Lucas, their executive director, is here. They do amazing work to represent the families who are precariously housed in order to prevent eviction and otherwise to strengthen and support them. Mika Godfrey is here from House ATL. Kristen Allen is here, one of the co-chairs of the Public Policy Committee for House ATL. There's no cost to join. We need your engagement. This was a passionate evening. This is day 26 of the 40-day session, so I'm already pretty worked up all the time. But this is amazing. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope you'll raise your voices and keep up the amazing work.
That was the answer to the question that I'm sure would have been, what can we do? Like, what should we do? Do this, like stop this. The only thing worse than being a tenant in Georgia, or in America for that matter, is not earning the designation tenant and not even earning the minimal rights that tenants have in a state like Georgia. And despite the fact that these families are living at these hotels, not for months, but years, despite the fact that school buses pull up to pick up children who have been there for years, that people have the hotel address on their driver's license, that's how long. The owners, they want to enjoy all of the financial fruits of the landlord-tenant relationship with none of the financial costs. They don't want to have to go through the court to put this family out when they are a day late on their rent. They want to just lock them out and call them squatters. And in the book, there's an extremely harrowing where at Efficiency Lodge, which led to this legal precedent, a dozen families were forced out at gunpoint by this, in effect, private militia that was hired to get them out. So this is like real. It's extremely scary what would happen if this built. So this is what you can do.
There's a sheet outside. There's a sheet outside on the table.
Yes, where you can learn. Yes, so please get involved with this.
Yara, how much time do we have for the question?
Okay, so we're already over time.
Yeah.
And out of respect for the library, I imagine that no one has a simple question to this easy issue. But the 4 people who are already in line, I want to honor y'all. If you would like to ask questions, come on. If folks need to leave, they may leave now, but come on up.
Do you want to ask like multiple at once and
Yeah. Actually, we're going to do rapid fire. Let's go.
And we're going to be
And then we'll sign
out
books.
in the lobby signing books and talking. So yes, you could.
So there's specific things you think that local governments, like counties and cities, should be doing specifically? Like I've read that, I think she was referring to the hotel report in DeKalb, where they found, the 714 families and the 11,036 kids.
Yeah.
I've asked Fulton County to do a similar report, and I can only imagine it would be like 4 to 6 times, more people.
Yes.
And I want to provide case management for the families in hotels the same way we would provide case management for street homeless, because I think they need those same services, and we're just not identifying them as homeless right now.
That's right. That's right.
Thanks. Thank you so much for this book, and thank you so much to the families that were allowed to put like their vulnerability out on the line. And I really just wanted to kind of like ask of like, how, I want to demonstrate how important it is to hear these stories, because I am one of these people that spent most of my adult life with housing precarity or experiencing homelessness, and I don't now. And I'm like, read your book and I was like, you did like give $50 to everyone I know who can't pay the rent. But I just want to know like where else can we find these stories of these people? Like where can we, like if we are storytellers, if that's our profession, how do we lift them up? And where do we find the ones that are already being told? Because it's so invisible and it feels so far away. And like you said, we're so much closer to that position, everyone in this room, than we are to like having a passive income from a third home.
Yeah, I mean, super quick on that, just like drive down Glenwood, drive down Candler, like I'm not trying to be flippant, like it really is, it's everywhere if you're looking for it. And but we can also talk if you're, yes, thank you.
On the block. Collect that gas station.
Hello. I'm going to be super quick, hopefully. I just wanted to bring up an organization that you have in the book that I recently used to work at. I wish they were able to be part of this organization, Housing Justice League. So I just wanted to encourage everyone here, if you are classed, if you do have money or time, to organize with and support Housing Justice League. Like if you only have money, just give money, but also give time. And I think that the point you're making about us not being far at all from these situations is the reason why each and every one of us have to find a way to get involved and not just be a spectator of people struggling. So I just want to hear from you maybe on ways that you've been able to use this book to encourage people to get involved more, and also, talk about how, again, locally we can make changes. I see Donnell Woodson here from Housing Help Center, which I think it's a good idea, but I don't know if a lot of Atlanta residents are benefiting. And I see Kelsey Bond, who I know is doing their best right now and is going to do better, help us do better over time. But Atlanta, of course, having these evictions, et cetera, we have like a perception that maybe our mayor is like super pro housing, but so many people are not feeling that. So how can we make sure that everybody in this room talking to y'all, gets involved with housing organizing and supporting tenants and even yourselves as people who are closer to homelessness.
And one very quick thing that we can all do is like have a paradigm shift when it comes to homeless. Like stop thinking of it in terms of like compassion and charity. I mean, that's wonderful. It's great to have empathy. It's great to have compassion. But like the most pernicious lie that we've been told is that the best we can do where homeless is like to be charitable. I think when Coquethia lost her home because it was seen as an investment, someone else's investment, even though she did nothing to deserve, like that's not a matter of like needing charity, that's a matter of needing justice. We have to start thinking of this in terms of justice and injustice, in terms not of like handing out socks once a year, but in terms of solidarity. And that's just like, that has to be the foundation, I believe, for all of the and yes, Housing Justice League, along with House ATL, like go to their monthly mass meeting, and you will link up with others who care very passionately about these things.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for writing the book and for hosting this conversation. Thank you for moderating. Thank you especially to Cookie and to Camille and to all the families who offered up their stories. Because these are your stories, I have to state that if you feel inclined to answer this question, absolutely. If not, I know you didn't come ready to speak. So the one thing that kind of struck me, I've been in Atlanta for almost 8 years now, is how the housing and the lack of public transit, the extremely car-centric culture here, they tie into each other so well in a way that harms most people here. And so from somebody who's reading this book for the first time, what can be missed about those ties, as well as the intentionality from the city and state governments to create such an environment?
That was not a, that's a big question. Gosh, I'm trying to think of like a really succinct way of saying. I mean, one thing I will just say, like in talking about all the gentrification, and because it's all real, like areas that are disinvested, areas where like that's not some like natural phenomena. You know, areas that are targeted for investment, what are now officially termed opportunity zones. This is all engineered, right? Gentrification, we have to stop thinking of it as, or revitalization, or as like this individual scale phenomenon of like, do I go to this coffee shop? Do I open this coffee shop? Do I go to this art gallery? Do I, the aesthetics of this, and seeing gentrification as something that is purposeful and produced. And when we look at it that way, we start to see a collusion of real estate capital on the one hand and city planning, urban governance on the other, what Samuel Stein calls the real estate state. And that becomes an encompassing frame, I believe, for understanding why some areas are deprived of any kind of transit or even sidewalks, or and why other areas are flourishing. And so it's just, that's just one immediate way of answering it, is just like to begin to scale up in our understanding, and to look at and to bring power into it, that this is really a question of who has power and who doesn't. And in a city like Atlanta, real estate has a hell of a lot of power.
Thank you guys so much for joining
Thank you.
Brian's going to be signing books outside.
Yes, so if you have a book,
inside, but
hey, listen up before you go. If you have a book, you're gonna get in the left-hand line. If you want to buy a book, you're gonna get in the right-hand line. And to respect the library, we're going to keep this really tight. So if you want to get Brian's email and send him an email with your life story, that would be awesome. Please do not tell him your life story in the signing. Thank you so much.